There are decisions that feel like compassion in the moment and reveal themselves as something more complicated over time. The best you can say about them is that you meant well. The worst you can say is that meaning well is not a defense against consequences, and that the mountain and whatever lives in it that is older and more patient than you does not grade on intention. I brought a baby Yeti home from the Kanchenjunga approach in October 2003. I kept it in my house in Pokhara for 11 days. On the night of October 27th, at 12 minutes past midnight, something came to my house that I have never been able to fully describe to anyone who was not there. And my wife Sunita has not slept without the bedroom door locked since. And my son Roshan, who was 9 years old that night, became a different child afterward in ways that took years to fully understand. I am 48 years old. I have been a high-altitude trekking guide for 22 years, and before that I was a porter for 6 years, and before that I grew up in the hills above Pokhara, watching my father guide foreign climbers toward summits. He had already forgotten we're remarkable, because remarkable, when it is your daily terrain, becomes ordinary. I have been on the slopes of more Himalayan peaks than I have fingers to count them on. I have seen things at altitude that I have not reported and will not report, because the reporting would accomplish nothing except the ending of a career I need and the beginning of conversations I do not want to have. The 11 days in October 2003 are the exception. The 11 days I am telling because they belong not only to me, but to Sunita and to Roshan and to the memory of my mother-in-law Devi, who was staying with us that month and who was 71 years old and who handled the night of October 27th with a composure that I did not have and that I have thought about every year since with a mixture of admiration and grief. What most people don't understand is that the worst thing I did was not bringing it home. The worst thing I did was waiting 11 days to take it back. I was leading a small trekking group, 4 clients, 2 other local staff, on the standard Kanchenjunga base camp approach from the Tapoljung side. It was a good group, experienced trekkers, appropriate fitness, the kind of clients who understand that the mountain does not owe them a schedule and who move through the high terrain with the patience it requires. We were 6 days in at approximately 3,800 meters, moving through the upper rhododendron zone toward our planned camp at Seram. On October 16th, at approximately 2 in the afternoon, the lead client, a Swiss man named Werner, who had been trekking in Nepal for 15 years, and who had the specific quality of mountain attention that long experience produces, stopped on the trail and held up his hand and pointed to the eastern slope above us. There was something moving in the rhododendron cover approximately 40 meters up the slope, moving in a way that was not the fluid, directional movement of a large mammal going somewhere, moving in the repetitive, constrained way of something that is trying to go somewhere and cannot. My clients looked at me. I looked at the slope. "Snow leopard," I said, because that was the next most likely explanation, and because the other explanation was not one I was prepared to offer to 4 European trekkers at 2 in the afternoon with 4 more hours of walking ahead of us. Werner looked at me with the specific expression of a man who has spent 15 years in these hills and knows the difference between a guide managing his group and a guide telling the truth. He said nothing. He looked back at the slope. After a moment, he said, It's quite small for a snow leopard. It was quite small for a snow leopard. It was also, which I was processing in real time while performing the calm professionalism my clients were paying for, quite small for what I was beginning to understand it actually was. I told the group to make camp at the flat section 200 meters ahead on the trail. I told my assistant Burr to get them settled and start the evening meal preparation. I said I was going up to check the slope. Possible injured animal I might need to assist. Burr looked at me the way Burr always looked at me when I was making a decision he thought was poor, but was not going to argue with in front of clients. He took the group forward. I went up the slope. The infant was caught. A section of old livestock fence, the thin wire fencing that herders use to protect their high pasture camps and that persists in the buffer zone terrain long after the camps are gone, half buried, invisible in the undergrowth, had wrapped around its right ankle and upper leg as it moved through the cover and had tightened with its struggling. It had been there for some time. The wire had cut through the fur into the skin in two places, and the struggling had made both cuts worse. It was approximately 18 months old by my best assessment, small enough to hold, large enough that holding it was not comfortable for either of us. The fur was the pale grayish-brown of very young Yeti, which I had seen once before at a distance, and which is distinctive enough that there was no ambiguity about what I was looking at. The face, when it turned toward me as I came through the rhododendron, was the face I have described to Sunita many times, and that she has asked me many times to stop describing, because the description is the part she finds hardest. It was the face of something that was exhausted from struggling, and that had stopped struggling, and that was now in the specific condition of a creature that has run through its available responses and arrived at stillness as the only remaining option. Not calm, not resigned. Still, the way a fire is still after the fuel is gone, not extinguished, just without the resources to continue. I had wire cutters in my pack. I always carry wire cutters in the buffer zone terrain because legacy fencing is a consistent hazard, and because I have freed enough birds and small mammals from it over the years that the tool has become as standard as my compass. I cut the wire in 3 places, working carefully and slowly and talking continuously in a low voice the way I talk to frightened animals, and unwrapped the sections from the leg. The wounds were not deep, but they were fresh and bleeding, and at altitude in October, the infection risk is real, and the temperature drop after dark makes any injury more dangerous than it would be at lower elevation. I cleaned the cuts with the antiseptic from my first aid kit and wrapped them with the bandaging I had, and I told myself, doing this, that I was going to set it down and walk back to camp. I set it down. It stood on the injured leg and took 1 step, and the leg gave way, and it made a sound that I will not attempt to describe beyond saying that it was short and it was involuntary, and it was the sound of pain expressing itself in a creature that had been holding very still to avoid making any sound at all. I picked it up again. I told myself I would carry it to the trail and release it where the terrain was flatter and the walking easier. Then I told myself I would carry it to camp and keep it overnight and release it in the morning when the light was better. Then I told myself, and this is the decision I have been examining for 21 years, that I could not leave something this young and this injured in this terrain in October, and that I would carry it down to Pokhara and treat the wounds properly and release it when it could walk without the leg giving way. I put it in my pack with the top open and carried it down to camp. Werner was waiting at the trail. He looked at the pack. He looked at me. He said, "I knew it wasn't a snow leopard." He said nothing else about it for the entire remainder of the trek, which is one of the things I have always respected about Werner. Getting it to Pokhara required 5 more days of trekking to the road head at Tapalayung, and then a vehicle journey of several hours on roads that test the endurance of humans and cargo equally. I kept it in the large duffel bag I use for personal gear, with the top partially open during the vehicle journey. It was, throughout this journey, remarkably contained, not passive. It was alert and watching and processing its environment with the specific continuous attention I had observed from the first moment in the rhododendron, but contained, as though it had made a calculation about the situation and arrived at a strategy of watchful tolerance that it was committed to maintaining. I called Sunita from Tapalayung on October 20th. I told her I was bringing home an injured animal that needed several days of recovery before I could return it to the wild. This was true. I told her it was a young primate I had found caught in fencing on the approach. This was also true. I did not tell her the species because I did not know how to tell her the species on a phone call from Tapalayung, and because I told myself, in the specific self-deception that characterizes decisions we know are poor but are committed to, that it would be easier to explain in person. Sunita is a practical woman. She has been married to a high-altitude guide for 18 years, and practical is a quality the profession selects for in its spouses. She said, "Has it been eating?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Has it bitten you?" I said, "No." She said, "All right, we'll manage." These are the 3 questions and the answer that I have described to people when they ask what Sunita is like, because they contain everything essential about her. My mother-in-law, Devi, was visiting from her sister's house in Pokhara when I arrived home on October 21st in the early evening. Roshan was 9 and had not yet been told what was in the duffel bag. Sunita was in the kitchen. The house was the ordinary house it had been when I left it 3 weeks earlier, with its ordinary smell of evening cooking and its ordinary sounds of a 9-year-old doing homework badly in the back room. And I stood in the doorway with the duffel bag and understood that I was about to make it a different house. And I did it anyway. Devi was the first one who saw it clearly. Sunita's reaction when I opened the bag on the kitchen floor was the controlled alarm of someone who has committed to managing a situation before fully understanding the situation, working through the commitment even as the information coming in is more significant than anticipated. Roshan made a sound that was somewhere between delight and fear, and settled over the next hour into something closer to delight. Devi looked at the infant in the open bag for a long moment, and then looked at me and said, in Nepali, something that translates approximately as, "You understand what you have done." It was not a question. My experience revealed something profound across the 11 days that followed, which is that the word domestication contains a deception. It implies that the domestic environment is neutral, that a wild creature brought into it becomes gradually adjusted. What I observed was something different. The domestic environment is not neutral. It is a specific and powerful set of signals, smells, sounds, and rhythms, and the creature in it is not adjusting to neutrality, but navigating a constant, complex, information-dense environment that it was not built for, and that was not built for it. The infant navigated it better than I had any right to expect. By the second day, it had mapped the ground floor of the house with a thoroughness that suggested the mapping was deliberate rather than exploratory, moving through each room in a systematic pattern that I recognized from years of watching large mammals assess new terrain as territory evaluation. By the third day, it had identified the warmest sleeping location, the corner of the kitchen nearest the gas line, where the wall retains heat from cooking, and was using it consistently. By the fifth day, Roshan had named it Babu, which is Nepali for baby or dear one, and it was responding to the name with the same head-turn reliability that a dog develops after weeks of training. The leg healed cleanly. The wire cuts closed without infection. By the sixth day, the gait was nearly normal on flat surfaces, with a residual caution on stairs that resolved by the ninth day. Physically, by October 26th, it was ready to return to the mountain. I knew this. I told myself I would take it back the following weekend, when I had a free day and could make the journey to suitable release terrain in the upper buffer zone. What most people don't understand about the delay is that it was not entirely my fault and was not entirely innocent. Roshan was the problem I had not anticipated. Roshan had, across 11 days, formed an attachment that I recognized and that I understood was going to make the return deeply painful for him. And I kept postponing the return because I was not ready to cause that pain, and in postponing it, I was compounding the problem I was trying to avoid. Sunita knew this. She said so on the evening of October 26th, quietly and without accusation, after Roshan had gone to bed. She said, "Every day you wait is another day Roshan loves it more, and another day something else notices it's here." I said I would take it back on Saturday. Saturday was 3 days away. This is the decision I cannot undo. I want to spend a moment on what Sunita meant, because she understood something I had been refusing to understand, and her understanding is a significant part of the record. Pokhara sits at 827 meters above sea level, at the foot of the Annapurna Massif, in a valley that has been settled and farmed and built upon for centuries. It is not wilderness. It is a city of 300,000 people with a lake and hotels and traffic and all the density of modern Nepali urban life. The upper buffer zone terrain where I had found the infant was 80 kilometers away and 1,500 meters higher. And yet, my observations consistently showed, across 6 days of paying attention in the way that the situation required, that the house was being watched. Not by anything I could see from the windows or identify in the street below, by something that was present at the margins of visibility, in the way that the most experienced wild creatures are present, not invisible, but never quite where you are looking when you look directly. The dog belonging to our neighbor Prakash, who barked reliably at cats and motorcycles and visitors in the smell of unfamiliar cooking, had been silent since October 23rd. Not absent. I could see him in Prakash's yard, silent and oriented, toward the tree line at the northern edge of the neighborhood, with the specific fixed attention of an animal that has registered something it does not have a category for and has decided that silence is the appropriate response. The infant was aware of it before I was. By the 9th day, It had shifted its sleeping location from the warm kitchen corner to a position against the interior wall furthest from the northern-facing windows, which I noticed and noted and told myself was a coincidence of preference. By the 10th day, it was spending its evenings in that position with a quality of inward attention, listening in a register I could not access to something the house walls were transmitting. Debbie said nothing during this period. She moved through the house with the specific, careful economy of someone managing her presence in a situation that has exceeded its original parameters, keeping the children calm, maintaining the routines, preparing the evening meals with the steady competence of a woman who has lived 71 years and understands that composure is not the absence of knowledge, but the discipline of not expressing all of it at once. On the evening of October 26th, after Sunita's warning, and after I had said Saturday and gone to bed, Devi sat in the kitchen for another 2 hours. I know this because I could not sleep and I could hear her moving. In the morning, the kitchen smelled of juniper smoke, the specific smell of the offering she burned at important thresholds, the offering her own mother had taught her, and that she had taught Sunita, and that Sunita had not yet taught Roshan because Roshan was still young enough that the gravity of thresholds was still being explained to him gently. She knew what was coming. She had known for days. She was doing what she could within the vocabulary available to her. The day was ordinary in the specific way that days are ordinary when something has already been decided that the people living in the day do not yet know. Roshan went to school. Sunita went to the clinic where she works 2 days a week as a health assistant. I was home. I had no guiding work that week, and I spent the morning doing equipment maintenance and the afternoon reviewing the route notes for a November expedition I was preparing for. The infant was restless in a way it had not been before, not aggressive or distressed. The wounds were healed. The leg was functional. There was no physical cause. Restless in the way that a creature is restless when its body is receiving information that its situation does not allow it to act on. Moving from room to room, returning to the interior wall position, and then leaving it, making the low, soft vocalizations that I had learned across 11 days to associate with an internal processing that had no outward resolution. By evening, the vocalizations had changed. Longer, more structured, directed at the northern wall of the house in a way that was unmistakable. Once I understood what I was observing, it was answering something. Something I could not hear was sending, and it was responding in the specific cadence of a call and response that has its own grammar, even when you cannot parse the grammar. I should have left with it that evening, loaded it in the vehicle, and driven the 80 kilometers to the buffer zone and released it in the dark and dealt with Roshan's grief in the morning. This is what I should have done. I did not do it because it was evening and the roads above Tapoljung are not safe in the dark, and because I had said Saturday and Saturday was tomorrow, and I told myself tomorrow was close enough. Roshan went to bed at 9, Sunita at 10:30. Debbie told me she would stay up a while, and I said goodnight and went to bed and lay there listening to the house and to the infant moving in the kitchen below and to the specific quality of the night outside the northern windows, which was the quality I had been managing for 4 days, and which was, by 11 o'clock on the night of October 27th, no longer something that could be managed. At 12 minutes past midnight, the quality changed. I want to account for what the hours between 9 in the evening and midnight were, because they are not nothing, and because what happened in them is part of why the night went the way it went. After Roshan went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with the infant for an hour. This had become our evening routine. The quiet of the house after the family was settled, the infant in its corner, me at the kitchen table with whatever I was reading or writing. It was the most ordinary part of an 11-day span that was in no other way ordinary, and I had come to depend on it in a way I did not fully recognize until the night it became something different. The infant's vocalizations had been escalating since approximately 8 o'clock. Not loudly, everything about its communication had an instinctive quality of restraint, as though it understood the premium that a domestic environment places on quiet without needing to be taught. But consistently, in a pattern that was moving from the short exchanges I had been hearing for 4 days towards something longer and more structured, a sustained communication rather than a back and forth, a message being composed and transmitted with the care that a long message requires. At 10 o'clock, I moved my chair so that I was sitting with my back to the southern wall facing north, so that I was in the same orientation as the infant. I did this without fully deciding to do it, the body making a choice the mind was still processing. We sat together in the kitchen facing the northern wall, and I could not hear what it was hearing, and it was not looking at me, but I was present, which was what was available, and presence was what I had to offer. At 11:15, the character of its vocalization changed again. The long composed transmission gave way to a listening quality, the pause between vocalizations extending, its head slightly tilted, the specific posture of a creature receiving a response it has been waiting for. Something had answered. Something was close enough now that the wall was no longer a significant barrier to the exchange. I stayed in my chair. I thought about waking Sunita. I thought about loading it in the vehicle and driving north in the dark. I thought about the roads above Tapoljung and the darkness and the 11 days that had already passed and the morning I had promised, and I sat in my chair at the kitchen table and I waited, which was the worst possible response and the only one I was capable of. At 12 minutes past midnight, the quality of the silence from the northern side of the house became something I had not encountered before in 22 years of work in the high terrain. Occupied, dense, the presence of something enormous, making itself known at the absolute lower limit of its own expression. The sound that woke Sunita was not loud. This is the detail that people find hardest to accept when I describe the night, because the expectation is of something dramatic, a roar, a crash, a conventional signal of large animal threat. What woke Sunita was a sound that she has described to me since as the sound of something very large being very quiet. The specific register of enormous controlled presence expressing itself at the absolute lower limit of its volume. Not a whisper. The decision to whisper by something that could have chosen differently. It was at the northern wall, on the outside. I know this from the behavior of the infant, which was in the kitchen when Sunita came downstairs, and which was pressed against the interior northern wall with its hands flat on the plaster and its face close to the surface, in the posture of something listening through a barrier with every sensory resource it has. Sunita stood in the kitchen doorway. She did not turn the light on. She has told me that she made this decision consciously, that she understood in the specific way that Nepali women who grow up in the hills understand certain things about what lives in them, that turning the light on was the wrong response to this particular darkness. The sound at the northern wall continued for perhaps 3 minutes. It was not a single sound, but a sequence, varying in pitch and duration in the pattern I had by then learned to recognize as purposeful communication. The infant responded to each element of the sequence. The exchange between what was outside the wall and what was inside it had the quality of an argument in which both parties know how it ends and are going through the necessary steps anyway. Devi appeared in the kitchen at 12:17. She had not been asleep. She was dressed and she had the small brass offering cup she kept in her room, and she moved past Sunita to the northern wall and placed the cup on the floor against the baseboard and said something very quietly that Sunita could not hear and that Devi never repeated and that I did not ask about, because Devi's relationship with the threshold of that night was her own and deserved its own privacy. Roshan did not wake. This is the thing I am most grateful for from that night, and that I have been most grateful for in the 21 years since. Roshan slept through the entirety of it, with the specific impermeable sleep of 9-year-olds, and his version of October 27th is a night that he does not remember and that I have never described to him in its full form. He is 30 years old now. He knows the broad outline. He does not know the detail of the northern wall. At 12:31, 19 minutes after it began, the sound at the northern wall stopped. The quality of the night outside changed back to ordinary. The infant remained against the wall for another several minutes, then moved to the center of the kitchen and sat down and made a single short vocalization, and was still. Sunita looked at me. I had come downstairs at 12:20 when the sounds had reached a duration I could not remain in bed through. We stood in the kitchen doorway together and looked at the infant in the center of the kitchen floor and did not speak. Devi said from beside the northern wall, "In the morning, first light, you take it back." She said it the way she said things that were not instructions, but observations about what was already decided. I said, "Yes." Sunita said nothing because nothing needed to be said. I went outside at first light on October 28th before loading the infant into the vehicle to look at the ground on the northern side of the house. The northern side of our house faces a narrow lane and then a low wall and then a vacant lot that has been used informally as a dumping ground for garden waste. Beyond the vacant lot is a stand of old pipal trees that marks the northern edge of the neighborhood before the terrain rises toward the first foothills. The lane is concrete. The vacant lot is soft earth and decomposed organic matter. In the earth of the vacant lot, beginning at the base of the pipal trees and ending at the low wall, were prints, 2 sets, overlapping in places, indicating a period of standing and moving back and forth in a contained area rather than a transit through the space. The prints were large, not the largest I have seen in the high terrain. This was not a fully mature adult, but large enough that I stood looking at them for a long time and then took the 4 photographs that are the only physical record I have of the night of October 27th, 2003. The photographs show clear bipedal prints in soft earth, approximately 38 centimeters in length, with the toe articulation pattern and arch structure that distinguishes Yeti prints from the bear mice identification that the skeptical literature relies on. The depth of the prints in the soft earth indicates a body weight, I estimated, based on the compression at between 200 and 250 kilograms. The positioning indicates a period of stationary presence of at least 30 minutes, long enough for the prints to compact and settle in a way that moving prints do not. The low wall between the vacant lot and our house, a brick wall approximately 1.5 meters high, the kind of boundary wall that Pokhara houses have between their property and the lane, had a section of fresh mortar damage on the top course of bricks nearest the northern wall of our house. The kind of damage that occurs when significant weight is briefly applied to a surface not designed for it, then removed. It had been on the wall, looking into the kitchen window. Here's why this changed everything for me. Not the prints in the vacant lot, which could be rationalized, which have been rationalized by every person I have shown the photographs to who was not in that kitchen on the night of October 27th. The mortar damage on the wall, the specific height of the damage relative to the kitchen window, the conclusion that follows from the height and the window and the kitchen where the infant spent its evenings pressed against the northern wall listening. It was not there to retrieve the infant. It could have gone over the wall and through the window and taken the infant at any point in the 11 days. It had not done this. It had come to the northern wall at 12 minutes past midnight and spoken to the infant, and then it had gone. And the infant had been ready to leave, and in the morning I had taken it. I loaded the infant into the vehicle at 5:45 in the morning. Roshan was still asleep. Sunita stood at the door and watched me put it in the back seat, wrapped in the blanket it had been sleeping under, and did not say anything except, "Drive carefully." I understood this to mean both the road and the situation and the full weight of everything that had happened and everything that had been decided, compressed into the 2 words that were available and sufficient. The drive took 2 hours to the roadhead and then 4 hours of walking to the terrain I had selected. A section of the upper buffer zone rhododendron that I knew well from previous survey work, and that was, by the habitat indicators I could read, actively used by the species. Good food sources, water, rocky cover. The specific combination of features that suggested a resident population rather than a transit zone. The infant knew we were going somewhere different from the moment I turned north out of Pokhara. I could see this in its behavior in the back seat. The shift from the watchful tolerance it had maintained in the house to something more alert, more oriented outward, its face turned toward the window and the terrain changing outside it with an attention that was not the curiosity of an animal in an unfamiliar environment, but the recognition of something returning. On the walk from the road head, I did not use the carrier. It walked beside me with the specific gait I had been watching for 11 days in the house, now fully functional on the terrain it was built for. The residual caution in the leg entirely gone, the movement through the rhododendron undergrowth fluid and confident in a way it had never been on our tile floors. Watching it move through the upper zone was like watching someone find their first language after years of managing in a second one. The ease was that visible and that complete. At the edge of a rocky drainage at 3,700 meters, I stopped. The infant stopped beside me. We stood there for a moment in the way that we had developed across 11 days of domestic proximity. The specific shared stillness of 2 beings that have been in close quarters long enough to have learned each other's rhythms. I crouched down to its level. It looked at me with the face I had been looking at for 11 days, which was already in the 3 hours since we had left Pokhara, becoming less readable to me as it became more fully itself in its own terrain. "Go," I said, in Nepali, and then in the wordless, low vocalization I had developed across 11 days. "Go. You're home." It turned and moved into the drainage. It did not look back. I had not expected it to, and it did not. And I sat on a rock at 3,700 meters and watched the rhododendron close behind it and stayed there until the cold made staying impractical. And then I walked back down to the road and drove back to Pokhara. Roshan cried for 3 days after I came home without it. This is what I had been postponing. It was as bad as I had expected, and it resolved, as childhood grief resolves when there is no complication, within a week. By November, he had been redirected into the normal current of a 9-year-old's life, and the infant had become the story he told his friends that they did not believe, and that became, over the years, a family story told at gatherings with the specific combination of pride and incredulity that families bring to their most improbable histories. What did not resolve as cleanly was Sunita's sleep. The locked bedroom door is still locked 21 years later. Not every night. She is not governed by it. It is not a disorder. But on certain nights, which I have learned to recognize by a quality of the evening that I cannot describe more precisely than certain, she gets up after I am asleep and locks the door, and in the morning it is unlocked again, and we do not discuss it. I understand what the lock is. It is the acknowledgement that the distance between Pokhara and the high terrain is not as great as the map makes it appear, and that 11 days is long enough to establish a connection that a single night visit does not erase. Devi died in 2009. 6 years after that October, she did not speak about the night of October 27th again, to my knowledge, in those 6 years. Not to me, not to Sunita, not in any form I was present for. What she said to the northern wall at 12:17 in the morning with the brass offering cup on the baseboard remains with her. I have made my peace with this. Some accounts belong to the person who held them and are complete in that holding. What most people don't understand about the regret in the title of this account is that it is not a simple regret. It is not, "I wish I had not brought it home." The 11 days produced things that I value, Roshan's memory of it, which shaped his relationship with the natural world in ways that are still visible in the adult he has become. The specific knowledge of the infant's behavior and intelligence, and the quality of its attention that 11 days of daily proximity gave me, and that no other form of encounter could have produced. Even the night of October 27th, terrible as it was to live through, gave me the photographs and the mortar damage and the understanding that the distance had been closed not with violence but with a voice, and that the voice had been sufficient. The regret is, I waited 11 days when I should have waited 3. I let Roshan's attachment deepen past what was necessary or kind. I let the connection build past the point where something 80 kilometers away and 1,500 meters above me could maintain the distance it needed to maintain. 3 days would have been enough for the leg. 3 days and an early return and a different shape to what Roshan carried, and a different night for Sunita, and perhaps a different relationship between Devi and the threshold she spent those 2 hours preparing for. I made the choice I made, and I lived in its consequences. and the consequences were survivable, and the people I love are whole. These are the things that matter. The rest is what I tell myself on the nights when Sunita locks the bedroom door and I am awake in the dark, listening to Pokhara and the hills above it and the distance between them. That is not as large as I once believed. This creature holds a secret that I had 11 days to observe at close range, and that the night of October 27th confirmed in a way that 11 days of domestic proximity had only partially revealed. It does not need us to understand it in order to navigate us. It knows what we are, what we feel, what we have taken, and what it will cost us. It has been watching human beings move through its terrain for long enough to have developed a model of our behavior that is, in my assessment, more accurate than our model of its behavior. The visit to the northern wall was not a threat. I want to be precise about this because the framing of this account, the title, the midnight, the terror, implies a danger that was not, in the end, what the night of October 27th actually was. What it was a demonstration. A demonstration that the distance between my house and the high terrain was not a barrier. That the connection I had established by carrying the infant down the mountain and keeping it for 11 days had consequences I was not authorized to ignore. That there are costs to intervening in the life of a wild creature that go beyond the immediate logistics of the intervention. The mountain understands something about consequence that our culture, which is good at celebrating compassion and poor at following it all the way through to what compassion requires, struggles to hold. Compassion is not the beginning of an intervention, it is the beginning of a relationship. Relationships have obligations. Obligations have timelines. The timeline I was given was the 11 days of an infant's recovery, and I used 10 of them correctly and squandered the last one because I was not ready for Rashawn's grief. And the mountain sent a messenger to the northern wall to clarify the timeline. I think about Devi at the northern wall with her offering cup. I think about what she said into that darkness, not to me, not to the infant, but to whatever was outside the wall. And whatever she said was, apparently, the right thing, because the response to it was departure and not escalation. 71 years of living in the shadow of these hills had given her the vocabulary for that specific conversation and the composure to have it at 12:17 in the morning while her son-in-law stood in the doorway unable to speak. I have been a mountain guide for 22 years. I know this terrain in the way that professional repetition produces knowledge, thorough, reliable, sufficient for the work. What Devi knew and what the prints in the vacant lot confirmed for me in a way that no subsequent fieldwork has undone is that knowing the terrain is not the same as understanding what lives in it. The map is not the mountain. The summit record is not the summit. And the creature that came to the northern wall of my house in Pokhara on the night of October 27, 2003, and spoke through the wall to the infant I had been, keeping for 11 days, that creature understands both of those truths in ways I am still 21 years later working toward. The photographs are in a folder in my desk. The folder is labeled in my own handwriting with the date and nothing else. Roshan has asked about the folder twice. I have told him the date is what it contains, a record of a specific day, and that when he is ready for the full account, he will tell me, and I will know he is ready when he stops asking what is in the folder and starts asking what happened that day. He has not yet made that shift. When he does, I will tell him everything, including the part about Devi at the wall, especially that part.